Alright, so the reason I wanted to make this video was because in the last video in this tutorial series, I made a few mistakes and I need to clear them up. And I also wanted to assure all my subscribers that the tutorial series is going on and I will do my best to avoid such mistakes in the future. And to also assure you that if I do make a mistake and I find out about it later, I will clear it up. So the first thing is the sub-oscillator's pulse wave, or square wave, which is unaffected by pulse width. You would be able to hear this if it was connected to anything, but it's not. To recap, this is what pulse width sounds like when you change it. But it does not affect this one, or else we'd be able to hear it. The ring modulation button turns off FM, or frequency modulation. The phase shift knob, when set to a low value, will phase your sound when you have a low amount of detune. To avoid this, set your phase shift all the way up. But setting your phase shift all the way up has another side effect. When detune is set to 0, you can hear it go up an octave. To avoid this, if you want a non-detuned sound, or a tuned sound as it were, set the phase to 0 and turn on sync. This is the only time I would ever recommend using sync. Phase shift is much better in most situations. The velocity knob. The velocity knob allows you to control the synth in the same way you would control a piano, where the harder you strike a piano, the louder the sound is, and the softer you strike it, the softer the sound is. To make this readily apparent, let's affect this first one. You can hear it's much quieter. And note that when we turn down the velocity, there's no perceptible difference. This is what the velocity knob does. Also note that the velocity switch affects the amount in the same way that the velocity knob affects the overall sound. The difference between a low pass 12 and a low pass 24 can be demonstrated in Pro Q. Here's a low pass 12 and here's a low pass 24. Very simple difference. A low pass 24 just cuts off a little bit quicker. Also note that the resonance knob can also be demonstrated in Pro Q. It does this to the sound. It boosts the frequencies before cutting them off, right before. And in the case of a high pass, it boosts them after. In the case of a band pass, it would look something like this, boosting the frequencies right in the center, because that's where the frequency knob would be. The track knob is applied directly to the frequency, not directly to the resonance, as I earlier stated. However, this is readily apparent when you have lots of resonance. As you can hear, the resonance is now following the pitch. It only does this at certain frequencies, as you can hear. And when you turn the track off, resonance will stay at the frequency tone. This is essentially the same as turning the track off. And the last thing I want to mention is the filter envelope. The filter envelope works in the same way as the amplifier envelope, with two key differences. The first key difference is you can turn it off. There, it is set to 0. It can be set to full 100 or negative 100. So you have a bit more customizability, because obviously you can't set the amplifier backwards. And the other difference, which is the main difference of course, is it is applied to the frequency itself, or where the frequency knob actually sits. So if you can imagine it with an attack, just taking it up, And then it's going straight back down because we have no decay and no sustain. With decay on, starts here, goes down. The sustain knob tells the frequency where it should sit. It essentially adds itself to the frequency. Note that using the frequency knob, when you have filter envelope on, acts as the zero, the new zero, for the envelope. So the attack would start here. It would peak at 127, but then the attack would continue on past it, even though the frequency knob can't physically go past 127. The decay would also start past 127 to get back to this point, and the sustain would be added to this. Also note that the release would go to this. The release isn't very noticeable, mostly because you have to end a note for it to be noticeable, and you have to have some release for it to be noticeable. This would be tedious for me to explain at the moment, so I will leave you with that. What the release does is it takes the frequency knob down from the sustain volume to the frequency after the note ends. And of course it's not very noticeable unless you have a long release, as I said. That is all I forgot to cover or just messed up on in the last tutorial. Please continue to watch my series, as I will do my best to make sure that this does not happen in the future. The next tutorial will cover these effects. This should be interesting. I'll see you then. Thank you and goodbye.